You may have recently opened Netflix and noticed an influx of Korean TV shows on your home screen. Like romantic Korean TV programs, critically acclaimed Korean TV programs, and K-dramas for beginners. Netflix has over 300 of these shows, and after the success of Squid Game, it invested another $2.5 billion in K-dramas. And it's not just Netflix. This is the moment that Parasite made history as the first foreign language film to win the Oscar for Best Picture in 2019, leaving behind some of the biggest names in Hollywood. And then this is the moment that BTS, the biggest K-pop band in the world, met Joe Biden.
Look at that, make you feel at home. You guys are good at this, huh?
The popularity of Korean media has grown to a point where it has started to shape culture, influence behavior, and give people a common ground to connect over all across the world. Something that until recently only Hollywood had the power to do. But now the pop culture dominance of Hollywood is open for competition. And how do I know all this? Because I'm just a person on the internet and it's impossible to miss, despite not seeing any of these shows. But what I don't quite understand is how the rise of Korean dramas has managed to rival Hollywood in such a short space of time. And with more and more people binging these shows and my TikTok feed just being full of memes that I don't quite understand, I kind of feel left out. So the plan is to watch 10 K-dramas over the next 10 weeks. I've got some options.
Andy.
Yes.
Not more K-dramas. But you have a video to do.
Yeah, but I'm just finishing this episode and then I'll get back to it, I promise. 10 shows to keep me going over the next 10 weeks to understand how this genre traveled from South Korea to all across the world. And to see if this success is just a phase or can K-dramas really compete with Hollywood in the long run. While it may seem like, whoa, not good, hit the microphone, sorry. While it may seem like K-dramas were an overnight success, they've been in the making for decades. In fact, there's a word for it.
Hallyu.
Hallyu, or Korean wave, is the name given to global popularity of South Korean culture and entertainment. Everything from K-pop bands like BTS and Blackpink to Korean skincare and food is part of this wave. And to fully understand the story behind Hallyu and how K-dramas came to be, we have to go all the way back to the Korean War.
Communist troops have invaded southern Korea in swift response.
From 1950 to 1953, crushing the economy, killing more than 2 million people, and leaving the country completely destroyed. While North Korea was able to recover within the first few years after the war, things improved for South Korea only in 1961, when the army led by General Park Chung-hee seized power. Unlike the previous leader of the country, Chung-hee put all his forces into industrialization and promoting entrepreneurship, paving the way for some of the biggest brands today like Hyundai, LG, and Samsung. But his regime was also infamous for heavy censorship of all forms of media, targeting artists and banning American music, calling it decadent foreign influence. On December 31st, 1961, government-owned KBS TV station was established and was mainly used as a propaganda tool to gain support for Park's dictatorship and consolidate national identity. But things started to change when private broadcast stations were finally allowed to operate by the government. By the late 60s, two of these stations, TBC TV and MBC TV, were established, and the government had begun opening up advertising revenue opportunities for these networks. The following years were marked by fierce competition amongst these three networks, which meant that more effort and money was being put into producing and promoting entertainment. The subject of the broadcast also started to shift from political agendas to about everyday lives of people. By this point, more shows were being released with better quality, and these dramas became a popular form of entertainment in South Korean households. Shows like Asi and Yoro explored people's lives during Japanese colonial rule and the Korean War. Susa Banjang, which ran for almost 2 decades, talked about the different social problems that people were facing at the time. People started getting used to the idea of watching television to find stories and characters that reflected their lives and those that they could connect with. Okay, slight issue, not a great start. Those shows, I've been able to find clips online that I've watched, but I can't find the full show. I've looked everywhere, even illegal places, but they're so old that I just can't find them online. So I'm gonna go rogue and just add in some shows as we go. But let's move on to the 80s, because this is considered the golden era of Korean broadcasting. On December 1st, 1980, color TV was introduced in South Korea, and the next government elected in 1987 ended the authoritarian rule of the previous leaders, and it immediately shifted its focus to modernizing the society and reducing media censorship. Within 5 years, national TV networks were reaching 99.3% of South Korean homes, which was more than the reach of any other form of media at the time. In addition to the usual history and period dramas, newer genres like romance were added into the mix to attract a younger generation. With improved technology of the 90s, these dramas were becoming well-produced, were getting increasingly popular in the country, and were able to scale up even faster, which helped them to get more popular and start traveling to neighboring countries in Asia. This show, What is Love, told the story of a authoritarian patriarchy, was the first Korean drama to ever be exported to China in 1997. And that's kind of considered the first unofficial case of Hallyu.
I just spent most of the night watching a show called Jealousy from 1992 on some really dodgy website. Not like that, like streaming online video website. It's the only place I could find it. It's totally the only place.
This was a show, along with The Last Match, where people were so obsessed with these characters that when these shows were on, the amount of cars on the road would dramatically decrease. And it was a night well spent. I got 90s sitcom vibes. And the government was taking note of the rising popularity of these homegrown productions when something overseas caught their attention.
Welcome to Jurassic Park.
Jurassic Park was released in '93 and became the biggest movie in the world at the time. The South Korean government was so impressed by its success that it released a report in 1994 comparing how the revenue generated by the movie was as much as the foreign sales of 1.5 million Hyundai cars, which was one of the biggest exports of the country back then. And remember, this was the time when Hollywood was entering a new era of innovation, with digital video, improved CGI, and huge marketing campaigns that turned these movies into the blockbusters we know today. The industry was taking big leaps, which were getting rewarded, and South Korea were like, we need that. We need to be doing what they're doing. Up until Jurassic Park, both the government and the people in the country believed that only big industries like automobiles, chemicals, and technology could drive South Korea forward. But the success of Jurassic Park changed that perception immediately and proved that entertainment was an industry worth investing. But then the Asian financial crash hit South Korea in 1997. The economy took such a severe hit that the Korean government was forced to ask the IMF for an emergency loan of $57 billion. This crisis also put a dent in South Korea's credibility as a place to do business, and its leaders understood that the country needed a nation rebranding exercise. The president at his inaugural address in '98 spoke about the government's plan to overcome the situation by globalizing the Korean culture, and hence began the 2000s, which marked the start of Korean dramas as we know them today. So the first massive hit came in 2002 in a show called Winter Sonata. But this was the show that really launched K-dramas and spurred on the whole Hallyu movement, the Korean wave, especially in Japan where it drew 20% of primetime viewers. But the show earned such a cult following that it had made $3.5 million in merchandise alone. That much money on merchandise was unheard of at the time. And in the following year, Jewel in the Palace truly globalized K-dramas, expanding its reach from Asia to the West, as well as the Middle East and Africa. And just to zoom out for a bit, this is the time when YouTube was launched in 2005. Netflix started streaming in 2007, and Hulu was launched in the US in 2008. Both the industry and the viewers were getting used to the idea of consuming entertainment online, and foreign entertainment, like that coming out of Korea, became more accessible to an international audience. On June 21st, 2011, one of South Korea's biggest networks, MBC, released a special YouTube-only edition of a popular rom-com, Naughty Kiss. This episode, along with the cast interviews and a behind-the-scenes documentary, drew more than 20 million viewers, with fans posting subtitles in English, Chinese, Japanese, and Spanish. After discovering that Netflix has 300 K-dramas, that's where I've been watching a lot of shows. I just finished The Glory.
Okay, this was potentially the best show, but it just made me feel sick the entire time.
And Crash Landing on You. but they're long. These shows are so long. The amount of hours that I've spent watching these shows is kind of ridiculous. Each episode, it's not like 40 to 60 minutes. No, that's not right. They're 90 minutes. Each episode is 90 minutes long. That's kind of wild. Where is my phone? I kept track of one of these shows. Okay, yeah. So Crash Landing on You, 16 episodes, which is also kind of long for like a streaming series this day, but it's not outrageous. Each episode is 90 minutes long. That's a total of 23.1 hours of content. And did I like it? It was fine. And that's the great thing about K-dramas, is that they tend to be one season long. So if you didn't enjoy something, you can just move on to something else because that story is complete. You don't need to suffer through another 10 seasons. What is my job? I just spent 24 hours watching a show called Goblin.
Okay, so it's now autumn in London, so I've changed my attire a bit, but on the bus on the way in, I realized that I feel like I'm dressed like Gong Yu's character from Goblin. Is my brain subliminally being like, that guy looks cool, I like what he's wearing, let's do that. So that's where I am in my life right now. And something else that I want to say about K-dramas is, I was talking about the length, sometimes complaining about them being long, but it actually allows the audience way more time to emotionally connect with these characters. There's way more time for character development because you have 90 minutes per episode.
But something I keep thinking about is, what would this success of K-dramas have looked like if we didn't have streaming services? Or maybe the problem is that US networks would never have greenlit a Korean drama because they would just be like, well, it's in Korean, like our audience isn't gonna watch that. Whereas platforms like Netflix just want as much content as possible. So I wanna find out what streaming services were able to do differently that the Hollywood studios and TV networks could never have done. So I need to speak to a K-drama expert.
There's this addiction and an obsession, and because it's bingeable, because it was on Netflix, the binge factor, I think, is so key to what becomes an obsession. You're essentially watching 16 movies because they're so long, but because you can roll right into the next episode, and because they're structured so that there's a cliffhanger at the end, you just keep rolling, you can't stop. It's just this obsession that just can't be denied.
President Dae-jung's 1998 mission of globalizing the Korean culture has successfully been achieved today, with the total export value of K-content in 2021 coming to almost $12.5 billion, which exceeded the value of big industries in Korea like home appliances, electric cars, and display panels. The Minister of Culture, Sports and Tourism, Park Bo-jun, said content has emerged as a rising star of Korean export. While Squid Game is the most successful show on Netflix, the popularity of K-dramas has only increased since then, topping the Netflix charts for several weeks with shows like Extraordinary Attorney Who, All of Us Are Dead, Business Proposal, and Alchemies of Souls. In fact, the global lockdown during the pandemic became a huge catalyst in the growth of K-drama's popularity. With theaters shut down and people stuck at home, a lot of these viewers turned to streaming platforms to watch films and TV that were released before the pandemic. The viewership of K-dramas increased by more than 4 times across Asia in 2020, and by 2.5 times in the US, Canada, Portugal, and Spain. As of June 2023, Netflix estimates that 60% of its more than 230 million subscribers have watched Korean titles.
Especially for Western watchers, Descendants of the Sun seems to be the big gateway. Back in the day, we'd get like bootleg VHSs to watch that. They had this like hub of people that they would find on the internet, and they would get these videos, or they would find torrent sites, and those are like the ones that are dedicated. And then the pandemic hit and Crash Landing on You happened, and it just imploded. Like, it was crazy the amount of people that were loving Crash Landing on You, were obsessed with it, were talking about it, but then Squid Game happened. Yeah. And then it just went global.
Squid Game.
Squid Game.
Squid Game.
Squid Game.
Squid Game has taken the world by storm.
I recreated every single set from Squid Game in real life.
The stars of the biggest television show in the world, Squid Game.
Welcome!
Also, the social implications of these shows is insane. I dived into K-drama TikTok. That was something. But there's these wild fan groups all over social media dedicated to K-pop, K-dramas. And it's not just Korea. People from all over the world are partaking and sharing their favorite shows and memes on TikTok.
I mean, the K-drama hashtag on TikTok has over 280 billion views. It's wild.
So it wasn't surprising when in early 2023, Netflix announced that it would put in $2.5 billion in Korean content, which would include TV series, films, as well as non-fiction shows. Apple TV, HBO Max, and Disney Plus have followed suit by producing and acquiring new content to add to their libraries of Korean dramas. Thanks to the success of streaming platforms, K-dramas have become a household name across the globe, and that also paved the way for its recognition amongst some of the biggest honors in Hollywood. While the success has been great for the South Korean entertainment industry and its global audience, I think the journey has just begun for K-dramas. To truly compete with Hollywood in its scale and revenue, K-dramas will need to continue innovating themselves and reach more domestic and international audiences. The box office revenue in the US stood at $7.5 billion in 2022, while the South Korean box office generated close to $500 million. I know that this isn't a fair comparison since Hollywood is a much older industry. It does give us an idea of what K-dramas are up against.
I figured I'd come back to the couch because I've spent most of the past 10 weeks sat on couches watching K-dramas. But what I wanted to say was, I, like a lot of the Western world, have been very influenced and inspired by Hollywood. So I'm sure I'm not the only one who saw Star Wars and was totally blown away by it as a kid. And the effects of those films have had a profound effect on me. And maybe I can't trace that like directly to what I do today, but without getting into like why Star Wars was such a masterpiece or like why I think it's so great, blah, blah, blah. It was objectively an innovation of the time. It was a huge leap forward in technology and filmmaking. George Lucas did so much with ILM. All that stuff has influenced my job and what I do so much. What I'm trying to say is that I'm really excited for the next generation, the next Quentin Tarantino. He or she may not come from Hollywood. They may be a Korean filmmaker or a Nigerian filmmaker, an Indian filmmaker, whatever, because that is what streaming services and the internet has opened up. And I think that's really exciting.
So if the question is whether K-dramas are the biggest competition of Hollywood today, I'd say the answer is yes, but they're still a long way away from winning.
And from the hours that I've spent consuming and watching K-dramas, it's not a fad. It's definitely not a fad. It's not just a thing that's going to be gone in a year. It's here to stay.
They are one of the very few TV and film industries that have fought their way out of domestic troubles like censorship and recession, proving their endurance to last through tough times. On top of it, they've managed to find a truly global audience with their viewership panning across continents. And their biggest mark of influence is how they have offered a significant alternative to global pop culture that was earlier dominated by the West. This trajectory is actually quite similar to Hollywood's in the early days when it made a mark with original hard-hitting productions and found an audience even in countries where the culture and society was very different from the West. This is the reason why these stories are finding their place right next to Hollywood titles at international film festivals, and leading US production houses are partnering with Korean studios to co-produce K-dramas together and reach an even bigger audience. But as the industry continues to grow, it also runs the risk of falling into the same traps that Hollywood is currently struggling with. And the biggest of them is fair compensation and IP rights. Squid Game gained the #1 ranking on Netflix in 94 countries and generated over $891 million, which is around 42 times its budget of $21.4 million. But writer and director Hwang Dong-hyuk didn't get any shares of this revenue, simply because he was made to give up all intellectual property rights to the show in his contract. In addition to this, the Netflix model in South Korea has also been infamous for exploitive labor practices, with crew members having to work overtime with barely any breaks in between, and they're not even compensated adequately. According to this report, the situation turned so grave that in 2016, a 27-year-old drama producer committed and leaving behind a note protesting these working conditions.
We're done. Okay, after hours and hours and hours and hours, I'm actually not sick of them. It was very refreshing watching stories that were new and from a different cultural perspective. Crash Landing on You was maybe not my favorite show, but I was really wrapped up in the fact that it was about this dude from North Korea and this lady from South Korea, and like the journey they go on and how they fall in love, but being depicted about that divide from a South Korea point of view as opposed to through the lens of the West. And with Hollywood, I feel like there's no movies that I really want to go see in the cinema. They're all sequels or prequels, but there's nothing new and exciting. So watching all these shows and following K-drama's journey so far has made one thing clear, like I've definitely got more bags under my eyes these days. But also, the Korean entertainment industry has evolved its craft over the years and has today found this global audience. But even though Netflix and the other streaming platforms were critical in putting Korean dramas out there, I actually think that the tables have turned. And it seems like right now that the streaming services need K-dramas way more than the dramas need the streaming services.